Paul Tasker, Chair KT Box Steering Board, thank you very much indeed for talking to the AIM Practice video today. We're here to look at industry, academia, collaborations. How important are those collaborations today, particularly with the economy in trouble?
I think they continue to be very important. They continue. I think many companies continue to be challenged by the benefits of investing in academia, and I think academia are quite challenged about interfacing with industry. But in my view, they seem to be getting better at it.
And those challenges, I mean, what are they? Do people immediately think in industry, oh, if I go to academia, I'll get a new eureka idea? And does academia think, well, gosh, if we go to industry, we can progress our ideas? Is there a natural union, or is it a bit trickier?
I think there's a concern that a number of companies, a number of sectors of industry do still think they can look for eureka ideas from academia. I think a number of companies have for a number of years been quite mature in their approach to seed-corn investments in what we might call blue skies or long-range research. But it's still quite difficult, I think, to get a meeting of minds on the timescales involved. Industry, does continue generally to be have a much more short-term outlook than academia. Academia, there's still a great emphasis on looking for funding to pursue academic research and look for, identify work on new thinking. And there is still one of the challenges, I think, is still getting the academic people to think very carefully about applications and to really engage with industry with applications in mind.
And is that the benefits? Is that why you, in industry or people in academia they see joint benefits in these challenges? It's win-win for both.
I think there are joint benefits at both levels. I'm not sure that in the sort of engineering research that I've been involved in, you really get eureka moments, but there are benefits in developing long-term deep understanding in emergent topics and fields. But there are also benefits when you can get a meeting of minds and you can get the academics with the right perspective on applications and generating value in industry. You can get a meeting of minds to generate sort of short-term results, which is what we've been trying to do with KT Box in many respects.
And do you always work with established partners? Do those roots in those collaborations go back 20 years or more? Or do you strike up new relationships from conferences such as these?
I think I think most of the relationships are pretty mature. The piece of research that we're focusing on with KT Box is essentially research into what we call complex services. It's service research. And that is largely about relationships. I think it sort of emphasises the importance of developing long-term relationships in this academic-industrial interface. I'm not aware of any successful, strong relationships that have sprung up overnight, let's say, very quickly. They take a long time to mature, and I think that's quite appropriate.
And that's what you've said about the timescales, that conflict of timescales between academia and industry that's got to think up a new product, never more so than today, and then get it perhaps into the shops or on the production lines within 18 months, and academia perhaps thinking 10 years ahead.
Yes, that's right. And I think it in terms of looking forward to the relationship, building the relationship, I think you've got to, probably from both perspectives, you've got to bear in mind both the long-term vision, where you want to get to as a company, as industry, with the relationship with academia, as well as the short-term need. One of the challenges, I think, is to get the sort of the academic guys, I would say, into the same frame of mind. You know, they tend to take the longer view. It's actually quite difficult to get them to take the short view, and we've still got this problem between us. It's been called the sort of the valley of death in terms of the ability of or the interest that academics have in developing sort of early stage research. And they're not quite getting it to a state of maturity, which is then executable within industry, and closing that gap between really good high quality research outputs and converting them into something that's really readily usable in industry has for a long time been a problem, and it's what we're dealing with, trying to deal with that issue within KT Box as one of the EPSRC funded knowledge transfer accounts at the moment.
Spotting a winning idea, is that easy? Or is it perhaps a loaded phrase, a winning idea?
I think a winning idea is quite difficult, a difficult concept. When I was working in industry, and we were sort of developing a relationship with the university, we had a concept of a field of research that we needed to develop. We needed an industry partner to develop, and we set out a long-term program for the relationship and for the area of work, and the concept was the winning idea. You know, we were looking to develop new thinking with our academic partner in an area that would give us commercial advantage, competitive advantage. But there wasn't a specific nugget there. We moved on quite rapidly in that relationship to really generate a lot of sort of internally generated pressure to come up with the winning idea, you know, from this fairly general field of research. What is it that we can actually identify now, you know, 2 years into this, 2 or 3 years into this long-term relationship, that's really going to make a discriminating difference to the way we operate in the marketplace? And I think that was an ask too far, and I think it would, you know, it is always going to be an ask too far. And I think, you know, what my experience from KT Box is that what you need to look forward to is putting together a lot of incremental improvements, which together will give you a sort of a winning portfolio of executable outputs from the relationship.
That brings us on neatly to managing expectations. Can you always deliver what you promise? How do you manage these expectations? You know, you might suddenly get another project you have to work on and put this one on hold. And, you know, being trustworthy, being seen to sort of engage in the relationship and deliver what you promise.
I think there are a number of excuses from a number of sort of academic guys which generally go along the lines that it's very difficult to predict and manage research. And from an industrial point of view, you know, companies are generally used to managing projects and programs and are really very focused on identifying the outputs they want to achieve, if not the outcomes, and the timeline for that. And getting that, getting those two management cultures together is probably as difficult as actually aligning the overall objectives in the first place. You know, I think academics can be, and clearly there are exceptions that break the rule, but I think academics can be a lot more focused on delivering what they promise. And again, with some notable exceptions, I think industry needs to be a little bit more flexible to be responsive to emergent research outcomes.
revelations then, presumably you've got these two interested parties pursuing the same interest, but also there's conflicts in the relationships, and perhaps those gritty conflicts can lead to revelations from working together. Do you think perhaps you get revelations that you wouldn't if you were just working in academia or just working in industry?
I think so, because certainly I've worked for a number of years in the interface really between industry and academia, and I think there is great once you can get that a degree of integrated working between not just the sort of the head office guys in a firm who are managing sort of long-term strategic capability development and relationships, but the operations people who are actually up to their hocks in managing individual businesses. You get them properly engaged with some of the academics, and we can generate an interest in the academics about really using their research outputs to support the way that business is performing. Then that integration can develop some really good thinking, really strong thinking. So I think it's a large part of the issue is actually putting the conditions in place for allowing that interchange to work.
And
sorry, if I just one other thing really.
So do you have to know what you want from the relationship to make that interchange work?
I think you do. I think both parties need to know what they want from the relationship, and I think both parties need to be very very clear with each other about what they want to do. It's very difficult. It's very easy to get distracted by not so much hidden agendas, but objectives that are not properly understood by the people you're working with.
Public-private information sources, data sharing, collaborations. It's a sensitive issue in today's world.
Funnily enough, we were talking last night about, funnily enough, with one of the commercial officers who was saying that getting a collaboration agreement in place, a confidentiality agreement in place for the programme was really challenging. And why did we really want one? And I think that there is generally not an issue with managing data. I mean, if you've got if everyone is clear about why they're working, why they're collaborating, and the objectives are clearly understood, then the parties are going to protect the information appropriately. And if someone decides to go off and misuse public or public-private or shared information, then they're probably going to do that irrespective of whether there's an agreement in place. So I've never come across a problem about data confidentiality and management, and we probably worry too much about it, quite honestly.